In recent years, Canadian courts have attempted to deal with the perceived overrepresentation of certain groups, specifically Indigenous people, by interpreting laws in a certain way, and certainly Parliament has passed a number of laws to give what I would call preferential treatment to people if they belong to a certain racial background. We're going to look at three of those today on Don't Talk TV and see how it affects, in my view, the overall fairness of the Canadian justice system. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. So I'm in the middle of a jury trial right now. I've had two jury trials back to back, so this video is of necessity going to have to be short and maybe not as polished as usual just because I'm busy preparing for the jury trial that just started earlier this week. But a friend sent me an article wanting my commentary on it, so I thought I'd take a look at it, and then that article gave rise to a couple other thoughts. And as I said in the preamble, there's actually three areas I want to look at where the laws have been changed or interpreted in Canada in a way that benefits only Indigenous people. The purpose of these changes are ostensibly to make things more fair for Indigenous people. In my view, it actually makes it less fair for everyone because, the justice system is either fair or it's not. And in my view, having different justice, different rules, different laws for other people is never going to be the way forward to a more just system. Doesn't benefit Indigenous people, doesn't benefit anyone else, in my view. So what we're going to look at is a recent Ontario Court of Appeal decision with respect to the ability of Crown attorneys to cross-examine accused people on their criminal record. We're going to look at a sentencing principle that deals specifically with Indigenous people that appears to be a race-based discount. And then thirdly, we're going to look at some changes to jury selection that were made by Justin Trudeau and how that affects things. So let's look at the article first. So this is an article from October the 9th, 2022 from National Post. It's an opinion piece from a gentleman named Jamie Sarkanak. And it's entitled, "The Ontario Homicide Case That Has Ended Racial Fairness in Court." The subtitle basically explains it. "Suppressing Criminal History for Indigenous People Facing Trial, Another Way Judges Are Softening the Laws on Books." The Ontario Court of Appeal ruled late September that the criminal records of Indigenous persons can't be excluded from their trials to preserve fairness. Trial fairness to Ontario's top court means creating race-based procedural rules to supposedly make up for the effects of systematic racism. In other words, these rules aren't fair at all. So looking at the Ontario Court of Appeal website, I looked up the decision. It's His Majesty the King and Dale King, 2022 ONCA 665. So paragraph 196, I think, is the one where, just to boil things down, it summarizes what the Ontario Court of Appeal has ruled here. And they say, accordingly, it is imperative that the Corbett analysis direct trial judges to consider whether in the context before them, the accused is at elevated risk of prejudice because of racial stereotypes. So just to back up a little bit, what is a Corbett application? It's an application that the defense counsel can bring requesting an order that their client not be allowed to be cross-examined on their criminal record. And part of that analysis is whether the probative value of their record going before the jury, whether that's probative, it's going to help prove the case, whether that value outweighs the prejudicial effect, which is just, showing that they're a bad person and getting them convicted because of who they are, not because of what they've done. So the Corbett application in and of itself is nothing, it's been around for a long time. It's nothing that controversial. But now what they're doing is they're adding another layer where they need to consider specifically, is there going to be more prejudice because a person is Indigenous? To me, again, having these separate rules actually heightens the risk of prejudice because people are going to see, well, why are they being treated differently? Why do they need to have their criminal record hidden more than people from other races? The potential's there, although I don't think this is as controversial as the National Post makes it sound, because generally, most accused people cannot be cross-examined on their criminal records because of that principle that people are to be tried for what they've done, or allegedly done, not who they are. Now that brings me to the second point, sentencing provisions under the Criminal Code of Canada, and what I've described as a, quote, race-based discount, unquote. Now, the courts have been careful to repeat over and over and over that this section of the Criminal Code isn't a race-based discount, but in practice, that seems to be the way it works in my experience. Section 718.2, Other Sentencing Principles, is the section that's pertinent to this. It says that a court that imposes a sentence shall also take into consideration the following principles. Talking about increasing or reducing based on aggravating and mitigating factors. But what I want to go down to here is sub E, that the court's to consider all available sanctions other than imprisonment that are reasonable in the circumstances and consistent with the harm done to victims or to the community should be considered for all offenders, with particular attention to the circumstances of Aboriginal offenders. So what that's saying is that they need to consider everything other than jail. Basically, only send people to jail if it's absolutely necessary, but even more so, they should consider that in connection with Indigenous people, because the government's way of... It seems that the government's intention is to reduce the number of Indigenous people in jail, not by improving the life circumstances of Indigenous people or looking into why are they disproportionately involved in crime. We're just going to give them lower sentences and reduce their population that way. Again, this is my personal view, definitely not the view of the Law Society of Ontario or anything else. I mean, not that I'm associated with anyone else, really, I'm a sole practitioner, but it seems to me that things like ensuring that people had clean drinking water is going to do more to reduce crime among Indigenous communities than giving them a lighter touch on sentence. But I mean, that's the law. I don't think it actually operates to make courts more fair. It seems inherent unfairness that one particular group gets lower sentences than everyone else simply because of the color of their skin. And that leads me to the final point, jury selection. Just very briefly, viewers may recall the Gerald Stanley case. I actually covered it in one of my self-defense videos. It was a white farmer accused of murder. He shot an Indigenous person who was on his land trying to steal something or do damage. I forget the particular details, but this Indigenous man was trespassing. There was a conflict, and Colton Bushy ended up being shot and died. Gerald Stanley was acquitted at trial, and this caused outrage among the mainstream media, and especially the Liberal Party of Canada. Prime Minister, in an unprecedented act, publicly decried the decision, interfering with the justice system, and without ever actually looking into what the composition of the jury was, the assumption was it was an all-white jury, that they acquitted Mr. Stanley simply because he was a fellow white, not because maybe the Crown hadn't proved the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And therefore, they had to change jury selection. Now, what they did is they took away peremptory challenges. Peremptory challenges were a certain number of challenges that both the Crown defense had, where they could just have a juror excluded without having to give any reason. I could get into peremptory challenges and some of the things that we used to look for, reasons we might use it, but it was actually a way to prevent having an all-white jury, because if you had a jury panel come up, the first 12 people are white, and number 13 and 14 are Indigenous. Without peremptory challenges, you may well have no way of getting 13 and 14 on the jury, but if you use a peremptory challenge to get a couple of those white people off, they could be on the jury now. So I think the removal of peremptory challenges actually does the opposite of what it was intended to do, and all it does is it makes jury selection almost completely random at this point. So that's all I have time to discuss for now. If you want to hear a bit more about it, leave a comment in the comment section. This video, of course, is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, call a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My phone number and website are listed below. If there's show topics you'd like to see us cover, please leave a comment in the comment section or send an email to the email address listed below. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and following us on social media.